Hey, I'm Jacob, the creator of the AI Vaults newsletter. Every week I hand the mic over to Google's Notebook LM to let AI break down the latest issue. So here's this week's news presented by Alex and Morgan.
Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're joining us right now, you are probably feeling that familiar crunch.
Yeah.
Like you're trying to stay on top of this massive, fast-moving week in tech, but you desperately want to avoid the sheer overwhelm of information overload.
Right. It's a lot.
It really is. So consider this your ultimate shortcut. We've built this experience specifically for you just to give you that comprehensive understanding without all the endless scrolling and fragmented headlines.
Because we really want to cut through the noise. We're getting straight to the signals that actually matter to, the way you live, the way you work, and how the world is fundamentally shifting around us.
Exactly. And just to set the stage, today's date is Monday, March 2, 2026.
Which is critical.
Very critical because the landscape we are tracking today is literally shifting by the hour. We have a really fascinating stack of sources to guide us through this. We are pulling from breaking news reports from NPR and TechCrunch.
And that developer study.
Yes, the incredibly revealing developer productivity study from METR. Plus, we've got the latest insights from issue 33 of the AI Vaults newsletter.
And looking at this stack of materials, there is a very clear, undeniable thread tying all of these sources together today.
Yeah.
We are witnessing the exact moment artificial intelligence is crashing headfirst into physical reality.
Boom. That's it right there. The era of AI just being this neat little trick inside a chat window on your browser, that is officially over.
It's done.
Today, we are talking about AI models being deployed into global military conflicts. We're talking massive data centers demanding unprecedented amounts of power from local electrical grids, and autonomous agents just entirely taking over background tasks in our daily lives.
It's a completely new paradigm.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the massive high-stakes standoff happening right now between big tech and the United States government.
Because we are looking at an unprecedented collision between corporate policy and national security. The software is no longer just code. It's being treated as critical defense infrastructure.
Right. So to give you the facts exactly as they've been reported by NPR, the Trump administration has formally designated the AI company Anthropic as a national security supply chain risk.
Which is huge.
It is a massive administrative move. It effectively bans Anthropic from all federal contracts. And this happened overnight, following a major standoff over a potential $200 million contract with the Pentagon.
What's fascinating here is the core of the conflict itself. The Department of Defense, which, as the sources note, has been rebranded under the current administration as the Department of War, they required that any AI models provided for government contracts must be available for, quote, all lawful purposes.
All lawful purposes. And Anthropic refused that blanket condition.
They did.
They cited what they called narrow exceptions. Specifically, they drew a hard red line against allowing their flagship model, Claude, to be used for two things: fully autonomous weapon systems and mass domestic surveillance. But why draw the line there specifically?
Well, Anthropic argued that current frontier AI models simply are not reliable enough yet for fully autonomous weapons, and that deploying them in life-or-death battlefield scenarios would endanger warfighters and civilians alike.
Right.
Furthermore, they stated that mass domestic surveillance of Americans violates fundamental constitutional rights. They essentially told the Pentagon that the technology is just too brittle to be making lethal decisions without a human pulling the trigger.
So looking impartially at the political actions that followed, the administration's response was swift and definitive. President Trump posted on Truth Social, stating that the, quote, left-wing nutjobs at Anthropic have made a disastrous mistake trying to strong-arm the Department of War and force them to obey their terms of service instead of our Constitution. He then ordered an immediate ban on all federal use of Anthropic's technology, stating the government will never do business with them again.
And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth stepped in immediately to enforce a 6-month phase-out of Anthropic's products across all government agencies.
Wow.
He stated that America's military will not be, quote, held hostage by the ideological whims of big tech. And he characterized Anthropic's stance as a masterclass in arrogance. So the message from the administration was clear. You do not dictate terms to the United States military.
But on the other side of the dispute, Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei has held his ground. He stated that the company cannot in good conscience accede to the government's request. And Anthropic has also announced plans to challenge the supply chain risk designation in federal court.
They're fighting back.
They are arguing that under existing law, the Pentagon doesn't actually have the statutory authority to block independent contractors from using Claude for their non-military customers. But then, and this is the crazy part, literally hours after the Anthropic ban was announced, rival AI company OpenAI swooped in and signed a deal to provide their technology for the Pentagon's classified networks.
Yeah, the timing of that maneuver definitely raised eyebrows across the entire industry. But the nuance here is what makes this so complex. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman came out and claimed that their new defense deal actually includes the exact same technical safeguards that Anthropic was asking for.
Wait, really?
Yes. Altman stated that OpenAI's agreement prohibits domestic mass surveillance and requires human responsibility for the use of force, including autonomous weapons.
So how did they get the contract?
He says the Department of War agreed to let OpenAI build their own safety stack. This means the model can technically refuse certain tasks, and the government won't force it to comply if it does.
Oh, wow. So OpenAI gets the massive contract, and Anthropic gets banned, even though they supposedly have the exact same ethical boundaries.
Exactly. You have two companies drawing similar technical lines, but ending up with wildly different relationships with the federal government based on how they navigated the diplomacy.
That is wild.
And we really have to ground this in the real-world context happening in the background. First, the sources note that 60 OpenAI employees and 300 Google employees actually signed an open letter backing Anthropic's stance.
Showing a massive fracture in the Silicon Valley talent pool.
Right, between defense tech and civilian tech mentalities. And second, this entire standoff unfolded just as news broke that the U.S. and Israeli governments began military bombing operations against Iran.
The geopolitical stakes literally could not be higher. We are talking about deploying frontier models while active military operations are underway.
This week sets a massive precedent. It forces the industry to ask who actually dictates the functional boundaries of technology deployed in global conflicts. Is it the private tech companies building the models in San Francisco, or the governments deploying them on the battlefield?
It's just wild that the government is fighting over the boundaries of the software, but honestly, the physical hardware required to actually run these models is causing its own kind of war right in our local backyards.
Oh, absolutely.
AI requires immense compute power, and compute power requires massive physical space and electricity.
The scale of the infrastructure build-out is almost difficult to comprehend. We're moving from abstract concepts of code to concrete and steel.
I was reading the TechCrunch piece, and the sheer scale of the infrastructure build-out just doesn't make sense to me. Amazon, Google, Meta, and Microsoft are planning to spend $650 billion in capital expenditures over the next year.
Yeah.
$650 billion. What does that kind of money actually buy?
Well, the vast majority of that capital is going straight into building new data centers and securing the power required to run them. But they are running into a massive physical bottleneck, which is local public resistance.
Interesting.
We are seeing major public backlash against the environmental and power grid impacts of these facilities. Communities are realizing that these data centers consume the equivalent electricity of small cities.
The sources highlight some very specific, intense local friction. In New York, state lawmakers, specifically Senator Kruger and Assemblymember Kells, have proposed a 3-year moratorium on all new data center permits.
A full pause.
Yeah. They are citing an energy affordability crisis that is driving up utility rates for everyday people. And places like New Orleans and Madison, Wisconsin, have already passed local bans on new data center construction entirely.
And the political resistance is fascinating because it crosses traditional party lines. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis just announced an AI Bill of Rights that gives local communities the power to limit data centers. Meanwhile, Senator Bernie Sanders has suggested a nationwide moratorium.
Wow.
When you have politicians from those opposite ends of the spectrum agreeing that we need to hit pause, there's a profound physical friction happening at the municipal level.
And nothing illustrates that friction better than the incredibly vivid example of the shadow grid.
Oh, this story.
The reporting details how Elon Musk's AI company, xAI, built a massive data center in Memphis called Colossus. To power this beast without overwhelming the public grid, they built their own private shadow grid using methane gas turbines.
This is where the physical reality of AI becomes an immediate environmental issue for the people living nearby.
Sure.
A shadow grid isn't just a clever engineering workaround, it's a localized power plant.
Right, and XAI initially bypassed air quality permits for these turbines, claiming a legal loophole. But after massive backlash from environmental activists complaining about smog, soot, and hazardous chemicals pouring into the local community, the EPA stepped in. They ruled against the company and forced them to get permitted.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is fundamentally a battle over physical resources. We're even seeing states like Georgia and Ohio fighting legislative battles over whether to kill the massive tax exemptions they have historically handed out to tech companies to lure these data centers in.
Because it's just not worth it anymore.
Exactly. Lawmakers are starting to argue that these facilities drain local water and power resources without providing enough long-term human jobs to justify the tax breaks.
So we have the macro-level physical friction of giant data centers. But the sources also show AI invading our personal physical space. Just this week, Mark Zuckerberg was spotted sitting front row at Prada's Fashion Week show in Milan alongside the brand's chief merchandising officer.
Which immediately fueled industry rumors about a Prada and Meta AI smart glasses collaboration.
Right.
They're trying to turn wearable surveillance into high fashion.
And this isn't a fringe market anymore. EssilorLuxottica, the company that makes Ray-Bans and Oakleys, sold 7 million AI glasses last year alone.
7 million.
That is up from 2 million the year before. They are everywhere.
But just as towns are rejecting data centers in their backyards, we are seeing citizens rejecting surveillance in their personal space. The TechCrunch piece notes a rising human resistance to these devices. People are actively smashing Ring doorbells and Flock surveillance cameras in their neighborhoods.
There is even a new app that was just developed solely to warn you if someone standing nearby is wearing a pair of AI smart glasses. People are actively trying to defend their physical privacy from the hardware that powers these models.
It perfectly illustrates the tension of this moment. We want the convenience of the technology, but we are deeply uncomfortable with the massive physical infrastructure and the pervasive surveillance hardware required to make it work.
Okay, so we are fighting over the servers and the glasses, but what are these systems actually doing all day? They're running autonomous agents, which brings us to the futuristic and sometimes bizarre integration of AI into our daily work and physical labor.
The transition from a reactive chatbot to a proactive autonomous agent is happening right now, and it is fundamentally changing the nature of work.
Perplexity just launched an autonomous digital worker that blew my mind. This isn't just a search engine anymore. For $200 a month, this system accepts a high-level goal from you, and then it coordinates 19 different AI models.
19,
including Claude Opus, Gemini, GPT 5.2, and Grok to execute subtasks. It can run complex projects in the background for hours, days, or even months without you needing to stay involved at all.
It is essentially a digital project manager delegating to a team of digital specialists. Microsoft is making a similar massive move into the background of your work life with Copilot tasks.
Yes, Copilot tasks. It's a background agent that works through your recurring to-do list while you are focused on other things. You tell it what to do in plain language, set a schedule, and it executes across your email, browser, and calendar.
Right.
Early testers are using it to automatically generate Monday morning briefings from their inbox or track apartment listings weekly.
But crucially, the sources note that Microsoft built in strict consent guardrails. The agent operates autonomously, but it will pause and ask you for explicit permission before it takes high-stakes actions, like actually sending money from your accounts or sending a message on your behalf to a colleague.
It is wild to think about these systems just humming along in the background, but AI is also moving into physical labor and design. Figma just partnered with OpenAI to let designers and developers seamlessly share a workflow. Can you explain how that actually works for someone who might not be a developer?
Historically, a designer draws a layout, and an engineer has to translate that drawing into code. With Figma integrating OpenAI's Codex, a designer can essentially use natural language prompts to generate working front-end code directly from their visual layouts.
Wow.
It completely bridges the gap between engineering and design.
Then you have Google absorbing its robotics unit, Intrinsic, directly into the main company. Their goal is to create an android of robots, which means building a universal software platform to automate factories, partnering with massive electronics manufacturers like Foxconn and FANU.
Yeah.
But maybe the most dystopian detail of the week. Burger King just launched an AI named Patty that lives inside the headsets of their drive-thru employees.
It sits in the headset, actively monitoring the employees' speech patterns during every single customer interaction.
It monitors them to ensure they say welcome, please, and thank you, and it's rolling out across all U.S. restaurants by the end of 2026. That is just staggering. Can you imagine the stress of having an AI constantly grading your politeness while you're trying to serve food during a lunch rush?
It is a profound shift in labor dynamics. The AI is no longer just assisting us. In many cases, it is orchestrating our work, or in the case of Burger King, directly policing our physical human interactions in real time.
Here's where it gets really interesting. With all these 19 model agents, background co-pilots, and code generators, are we actually getting more productive? The sources point to a study by MER on developer productivity that completely flips the script on what the tech industry has been promising us.
The METR study is one of the most revealing pieces of research in this stack. In early 2025, METR published a paper showing that using AI tools actually made experienced open-source developers 20% slower.
Slower. They had access to the most advanced tools on the planet, and it bogged them down. How does that happen?
Well, to understand how things might have changed as the tools evolved, METR tried to run a new, updated experiment in late 2025 and early 2026 with a larger pool of developers and the latest AI models.
And the researchers had to publicly announce that they were changing their experiment design because the data was completely unreliable. The developers flat out refused to participate if they were randomly assigned to the no AI control group.
The selection bias completely ruined the integrity of the study.
They were cherry-picking their tasks. Between 30 and 50% of the developers admitted they were avoiding submitting complex tasks for the study because they dreaded the idea of having to do them manually.
Yeah.
One developer's quote from the study is just incredible. They said, "My head's going to explode if I try to do too much the old-fashioned way because it's like trying to get across the city walking when all of a sudden I was more used to taking an Uber."
It perfectly captures the psychological shift taking place in the workforce. It's not just about raw speed, it's about the cognitive load.
Right.
Once your brain gets used to offloading the tedious boilerplate work to an AI, the friction of going back to manual execution feels insurmountable. We should note that METR also reduced the pay for this second study from $150 an hour down to $50 an hour, which they admit likely worsened this selection effect.
Definitely.
Developers weren't willing to suffer through manual coding for a third of the pay.
Still, the fact that experienced coders are refusing to work without AI is incredibly telling about where we are headed.
This raises an important question. Are we actually getting faster, or are we just fundamentally changing how we work and what kinds of cognitive tasks we're willing to tolerate?
It really makes you wonder about your own workflow. Are you actually getting your projects done faster? Or have you just changed what tasks you're willing to tolerate? And it ties perfectly back to a piece from the AI Vaults newsletter, their prompt of the week.
I love this part.
The newsletter argues that we are building these massive 19-model agents to handle our communication overload. But often the real bottleneck isn't the technology, it is simply human clarity. They provided a prompt for a minimal viable email, which forces an AI to distill a dense document into just 3 simple sentences: the headline, the context, and the ask.
It highlights a deep irony in our current technological moment. We are deploying trillions of dollars in physical infrastructure, burning methane gas to power shadow grids in Memphis, and orchestrating 19 different AI models at once, all to try and solve the fact that we don't have the time to read long emails or clearly articulate what we need from each other.
It is a wild paradox to consider. We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started with the high-stakes geopolitics of the Pentagon, Anthropic, and OpenAI fighting over the boundaries of autonomous weapons and mass surveillance.
We moved through the physical friction of the AI boom. The $650 billion in data centers, the local political moratoriums, the environmental backlash, and the privacy concerns surrounding Meta and Prada's smart glasses.
And we wrapped up with a bizarre reality of our new work life. Perplexity and Microsoft agents running our to-do lists in the background, Google building the android of factory robots, Burger King's headset policing, and the productivity paradox where developers refuse to code without AI, even if it might actually be making them slower.
As we close today, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought that builds on everything we've discussed. If we are rapidly entering an era where Perplexity and Microsoft agents are autonomously executing our work in the background and intrinsics robots are physically running our factory floors, who holds the ultimate legal liability when an autonomous agent makes a critical error?
Wow. That is the $650 billion question.
Think about it. If the Pentagon, big tech CEOs, and local state governments cannot even agree right now on the most basic boundaries of AI safety, infrastructure resources, and physical privacy,